Yes, yes. Let's go. 4 hours of sleep, 6 days of work. Man, so frustrated right now. Kept signing me off of fucking YouTube, cursing off the bat. No good. ¿Cómo están? I hope you're all doing well. Why am I running on 4 hours of sleep? Well, last night, instead of going to sleep early for an 8 a.m. shift, I'm like, let me stay up. Let me stay up and see history. Man, what a beautiful, inspiring words don't you know, words don't do it justice. But we saw Palestinian uprising. Yeah, it was you don't really think you're gonna live through this stuff. You read about it, you study it, you try to incorporate it the best you can into your life. Yeah, I'm totally lost for words. It was wild because prior to this going down, I was speaking to a good friend of mine who is Palestinian. I won't get into the details. I don't want to get him in trouble. But we're speaking on a totally unrelated manner. We're speaking about for like family stuff. Good news, good stuff. For the most part, right? So yeah, he's sharing with me, what's going on in his life, and we're just going back and forth. To be honest, it had been a little while since we actually, you know, had an exchange where it wasn't just memes. So around that conversation, all this starts popping off. And to be honest, at first I'm like, this can't like, nah, this isn't actually happening. At least not to the extent that we realize that it's happening. And through every like new update, you know, it's happening. Palestinians, man. Palestinians. Truly the inspiration of the world right now. Reminding you that occupation is not victory. So beautiful. So inspiring. I know it sounds like a cliche or patronizing perhaps. I don't know. But it really, made my eyes tear up and my heart fucking fire up. Or a fire in the belly, is that better? Yeah, let's go with that. A fire in the belly. So, all right. The title is what the title is. Let's go through that. For the most part, we already knew that Bernie Sanders, in regards to his foreign policy, has always been he's always been an imperialist in that regard. He wants us, and he wants the empire internally to be functioning in a more fair manner. But he knows that in order for us to live the quality of life that we live, it is necessary to exploit and oppress those outside the empire. He's always known that, and he's never fought against it. So that's not surprising. What was a little bit more surprising was Dr. Cornel West, formerly from the People's Movement Party, formerly from the Green Party and now an independent, and now a supporter of Israel, trying to do the whole both sides. I'm telling you, like Trump just laid out the playbook for all these people because the whole, there was decent people on both sides, fine people, shameless. At least Trump was funny. Like, what's going on? No character, no spine. Man. But that's what happens with these like turn the other cheek type of individuals. That's not how you win anything. That's not how you overcome your oppression. There's a reason why they took out Malcolm X first and then Martin Luther King Jr. Can you imagine the reverse? Like, take a minute. Matter of fact, right? So, if they would have taken out the peaceful one, right, quote unquote, peaceful protest, nonviolent, but always strapped up, if they would have taken him out first, and now all you have left is Malcolm X saying by any means necessary, come on, the Empire is smart, it's intelligent, a little overhyped, but they know what they're doing. Again, there's a reason why they took out the one saying by any means necessary, and they allowed the nonviolent one to continue on until he stepped a little too far out of line, speaking out against the military industrial complex, going beyond the quote unquote race issue and tackling class, and privately flirting, full on embracing not white women, but socialism. That is threatening. And we're going to touch on that breakthrough news coming through. Rania Khaled. The timing could not have been better. Just so grateful for her work. So, yes, please go check out Breakthrough News if you haven't. Amazing work. So, we're going to be looking at their video, their interview. But back to the Heartbreakers. You remember the woman who was going to bring the ruckus? The Latina inspiration? The one that was forced by Nancy Pelosi to renege on her no vote to fund the Iron Dome. She was heartbroken. Who knows what Nancy Pelosi whispered in her ear? Maybe she gave her like a pinch. Como vas a ver, checking her out in public. Like just when you're younger and you would act up, you got a little too crazy, and your headphones like just, just a little bit. Corporal punishment at this point, right? But it worked. Like, it wouldn't make you cry though. So Nancy Pelosi has got that grip, right? Enough to make AOC, Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez, cry publicly. But we've seen her crocodile tears before. When she was in the border, in the concentration camps ran by ICE, she cried, she teared up. I haven't seen those tears since. I always say this, I voted for Biden, not for Biden. I knew what he was, but in hopes that if anything, just one thing, AOC would keep the same pressure to abolish ICE. You know, saying abolish the police is such a radical thing. And there's a lot more nuance to it than just a slogan. So I can understand why that really doesn't work in a larger scale to galvanize people, right? But ICE is relatively new. We have lived in a world without ICE and we go back to it. But she did not keep that pressure. And we see just this, I don't know how slow. I guess it depends on where your bar was for her, your expectations of her. But every time I see anything about her, it's like a larger and larger disappointment. Or just in reality, just more and more of a basic politician, of a DNC face, right? So yeah, they all put out their statement condemning Palestinians' right, their legal right, their human right to combat their oppressors, to attack their colonizers, to take justice into their own hands because they've been abandoned by the international community. We're out here funding white nationalists in Ukraine, nothing for Palestinians. In fact, Joe Biden has got a little present for Israel. It's just shameless. It's disgusting. But honestly, and this isn't romanticizing them. This isn't, yeah, you never want to exoticize. I wouldn't want to say fetishize because it's not a sexual aspect. But yes, you never want to romanticize people, human beings that are struggling, that are risking their lives, that are being oppressed, that are starving, that are being ethnically cleansed. You never want to do that. You want to be honest. You have to be concerned of the reality. We've seen the consequences of this historic attack on Israel. Israel needs no excuse, needs no reason. Its mere existence is enough to want to commit human rights violation against Palestinians. But let's go into it. And how can you forget? I almost did. If you rank the quote unquote squad members, so individuals who were advertised as the squad but don't vote together, so have no legitimate political power, and when they do, they don't wield it. Ilhan Omar. If you know her story, being in a refugee camp, coming from a colonized, war inflicted country, Somalia, you would think, you would hope, shit, one would assume that she would have some sympathy, some understanding for for what Palestinians are going through. Nah, making an ass out of all of us. That one is the saddest. You have, against all odds, achieved a level of power, popularity, of acceptance, right? And you completely throw away that grit, that will, that strength that allow you to overcome all those challenges. Oh no, Omar, you tell me you don't feel anything when you see Palestinians finally being able to force the beast that is Israel to bleed, truly bleed, to suffer just a bit of what the Palestinians have been suffering endlessly since the colonization began. You don't feel anything? Your first inclination, your first thoughts, your first feelings, or think of the settlers? Man, like I hope that you felt something and you just sold out and you store it away. Because at least then I'm like, all right, you're still human. But if you really sold out to such an extent, if you bought in to this the American dream or whatever it is, if you bought into it and you don't feel anything, what are you at that point? Not about to start calling all politicians demons, but it requires a unique soullessness. I'm not even gonna mention that fucking Fetterman. Man, you know what it is, Fetterman? Just because he's so huge, like physically imposing, people don't realize what a fucking hipster he is. Yeah, like those rich kids that dress all the way down to kind of like just be nonchalant. But he's always been a proud and out Zionist. We've known this. But yeah, I stayed up to 2 a.m. last night, running on 4 hours of sleep. I'm like, let's do a quick stream, and here I am rambling. I was getting into it with people all, for the most part, it was all celebration, it was all joyous. But yeah, then, Israel starts their counterattack, and Zionists get a little uppity, get a little hyped up, get a little, se creen muy chingones all of a sudden again. At least the ones abroad. And then just going back and forth with Zionists. And one of the things that I always emphasize, you know, I was very fortunate that my union brothers were asking me, "Hey, what's going on? Break it down." They started, social media and everything. You see this, and I'm over here like pulling, pulling out a map of Palestine and just trying to break down the history in the most concise, direct, and honest manner. With your spark notes to the max. Like you just cliff notes, all that stuff. Like just reducing it to like three key or four or five key points. But they ask questions, which I fucking love. But it's like, okay, like I have a limited knowledge of it. They're asking legitimate questions, but if I start just spewing too much information, that's just gonna be confusing. One of them who I don't know, literally our first conversation, this guy, and he literally said, "Who are the bad guys?" I'm not those West Hollywood champagne socialists. I'm not one of those Beverly Hills anarchists. Like I'm not that. I'm not that. I'm very fortunate to be where I am in life, and those people would off themselves if they had my life, much less my childhood. So I'm not saying this in like in a disrespectful or demeaning manner, just to say like, oh, it's a very almost cartoonish manner to view the world, or who are the good guys, who are the bad guys. But in his defense, like this is the one issue, like that is it literally is that, like the good guys and the bad guys. Right. And obviously it goes without saying, like, but here I go saying it like the Palestinians are the good guys. And you're starting to see all this propaganda just immediately. I would never deny that RAPE happens in war and violent conflicts. Um, I need to see more evidence just to be just direct and honest. I'm not here denying anybody's truth or anything like that. No. The reason why I need to see more evidence is because the propaganda is so strong and Israel has it down to a T, and they have the backing and the support. I mean, Elon Musk was literally sitting next to Benjamin Netanyahu and like having a full on conversation. And Benjamin Netanyahu was just trying to get him to like disavow white nationalists and anti Semitism. I mean, capitalism, right? It shows you who wields power in that situation. And he's like, nah, like free speech. Hmm. So, but we know that their social media, news media in general, is hand in hand aligned with the state. It's not state media, right? Everybody freaks out about that. No, no. But they know where the bread is buttered. They know what's going to keep a government happy. They know what's going to keep the profits happy. They know what's going to keep people in fear. But immediately, who are the good guys and the bad guys? Corporate media. And who's getting the push on social media to seem like the victims, to seem like the good guy, the underdog? That's Israel. So all these accusations that just spurred immediately of RAPE, boy, I'm telling you, it's tired. Yeah, I'm just gonna need a little bit more information before I just accept that. Um, let's be very clear: if you're gonna take hostages, you're gonna target women and children because they're just seen as more valuable. They can get and garner more sympathy, whereas like a man, a soldier, not quite. We really got to dive into the literature here. Um, but I do want to say one thing. I want to make it very clear. If you take anything away from this, is colonizers, aka settlers, they're not civilians. Inherently, they are not civilians. So there have been no civilian casualties, from my understanding, from my awareness. Because if you're literally helping a settler colonial project exist, your mere presence in Palestinian land occupied by Israel is helping promote the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. No matter what way you want to look at it, you are a combatant. You're promoting that. Your presence in Palestine is directly, without question, inflicting damage on the indigenous population of Palestinians. So you are not a civilian. And they know this. They know this because when they need to get all hyped up, when they need to convince themselves to commit a genocide against Palestinians, they're all ready to strap up. They're all ready to get down. But they were blindsided this time. And there's consequences to oppressing people. There's consequences to putting people in a in a cage. What's called the world's largest open air prison, right? All right, so let's see what Bernie said first, and then we'll dive into the literature. Psh, I knew I was not going to be logged into this. Or Jesus. Yep. I don't understand why everything just um literally where we at, Bernie? All right, this fucking guy. Yeah, it's gonna be a hassle doing this. I almost want to disregard everything and just focus on the literature itself. But I understand that it's got to be a little bit entertaining. Got to stir up the drama. I get that part, but Jesus, like at this point, if you don't know that Bernie Sanders is a fucking sellout, he's a traitor to the fucking working class. Then what are you doing? There we go. Here it is. Yeah. All right, let's share this real quick. Yeah, like I said, like I'm logged out of everything. But here we go. Look at this. Look at this fucking scumbag. I absolutely condemn the horrifying attack on Israel by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. There is no justification for this violence, and innocent people on both sides will suffer hugely because of it. Like, it must end even that, like, it's very Trumpian, right? Like the whole both sides thing, but hugely. Like, this is Bernie Sanders telling us, like, yo, like, they're forcing me to do this, and he just like sending little subliminals, like, would I use the word hugely? It's a Trump thing. Come on, like, pick it up, pick it up. No, he's just a fucking sellout. He's always been a Zionist. He's always been a supporter of Israel. Um, he probably honestly hates Palestinians, if we're being honest. Like the fact that they give him this headache that he has to deal with to walk the line to continue to pretend to be somebody on the left and independent, right? It wasn't horrifying. It was inspirational, Bernie. It was awe-inspiring. Gee, and he really put Islamic Jihad, bro. That is wild. That is astonishing that he put that. And here's why though. Like this is why it's baffling because it's like they're not they're not going they're not fighting Israel because of jihad. They're fighting Israel because they've colonized Palestine. Ah, what a piece of shit that guy. I'm telling you, like it's just one thing or another, man. Jesus. Okay, all right, all right. The tabloids coming through. Like all of them. Jesus, they all lined up. All right, let me share this right here. The Daily Mail, the best, the best source I hear, but they lined everything up fairly nicely. Here's what AOC said: Today is devastating for all those seeking a lasting peace and respect for human rights in Israel and Palestine. Nobody's seeking that in Israel. We're not seeking that in Israel. The only way to have respect for human rights, the only way to have lasting peace, is with completely liberated and free Palestine from the river to the sea. I always say this: if Jewish people really want their own state, and Germany is right there. They're the ones that have done y'all the worst. I'll be your number one fan when it comes to that. Make those Europeans pay for what they did to you. All the pogroms throughout the centuries. Try flexing on those neighbors though. All right, she continues. I condemn Hamas attack in the strongest possible terms. No child and family should ever endure this kind of violence and fear. And this violence will not solve the ongoing oppression and occupation in the region. Nonviolence hasn't. So maybe a strongly worded letter to Benjamin Netanyahu, like you did for Biden, saying like, "Oh, please, please don't build, please don't build a wall." Man, like I understand you're spineless, like you're a fucking sellout. No, no, you're an opportunist. You never sold out. You were always bought in. From when you interned with the Kennedy, you were always bought in. An immediate ceasefire and de-escalation is urgently needed to save lives. Yeah, that's what's needed. Here we have Ilhan Omar. I condemn the horrific acts we are all seeing unfold today in Israel against children, women, the elderly, the unarmed people who are being slaughtered and taken hostage by Hamas. Such senseless violence will only repeat the back and forth cycle we've seen, which we cannot allow. Goes on to say, we cannot allow to continue. We need to call for de escalation and ceasefire. I will keep advocating for peace and justice throughout the Middle East. The way that they go out of their way to be like children, women, the elderly. To be honest, I'm surprised they didn't like just immediately start like throwing like the LGBTQ, the disabled, um, the terminally online, the obese, the like all these everything that probably like cues really well on their like for their audience. And I'm down with all those people, right? But it's like the goal here is to make Israel seem like the victim. This back and forth, this cycle we've seen. Tell me when did that begin? Could it have been during the colonization of Palestine? Is that when the Zionists began their kibbutz, their quote unquote socialist projects, according to Chomsky and the Zionist Guard, right? When they would go around and buy up land, start trying to buy off the land around them and kick off the indigenous people, the poor people. So much for class solidarity there. Yeah, these other well, yeah, Jabal Bowman. Yeah, right. He's Jesus. There's not even worth fucking reading, to be honest with you. Let's move on from that. You got that taste of these DNC Zionist loving, Israel supporting warmongers. But look how heartbroken they are that they can't send money to Ukraine. They're so upset that the GOP managed to, have a victory in that regard. Man, it's despicable. So I wanna let's go into I don't know what that was. Why it's so important to have solidarity. Where are we at? Nope. Okay. So we're gonna be reading from Kwame Ture Stokely Speaks. All right, I found you. The Black American and Palestinian revolutions. I would like to begin by talking about the history of the Black movement. As oppressed people, we do have in common the fact that our press releases and our statements, if they even hit the news media, which is controlled by the oppressor, are often distorted and the press never tells the truth. Malcolm was really good at calling this out as well. Malcolm X. The truth is that the only course that Black people have in this country The truth is that the only course that Black people in this country can take is a revolutionary path. As you know, African Americans were stolen from Africa. We were brought to this country as slaves. We had no choice as to whom we were to mate with, how we were to be mated, where we were to live, or anything. We had a course to face the most brutal oppression of anyone. Of the wretched of the earth, it is said the Black people are the most damned. I am inclined to believe that because certainly we have faced the most brutal oppression. We have been stripped of everything. We have been the most dehumanized of all the oppressed people. Having been stripped of our culture, the Black man now finds himself inside a country and inside a world that he must begin to try his best to relate to. Now, we find that the Black people in the United States are colonized people, as differentiated from the exploited people. People who are exploited are oppressed people, so are colonized people. But exploited people are oppressed mainly for economic reasons. Colonized people are not only exploited because of economic wealth, but their culture, their values, their language, their entire way of life are stripped from them, and they are forced to identify with the oppressor. And that's very important because it means that as the two groups that are oppressed move, the exploited and the colonized, they must move in different paths. For example, it is a fact that there are white people in this country who are exploited. And see, this whole, Norm Finkelstein, which is a great source to use in regards to Israel's colonization of Palestine. However, this right here, the idea that somehow African studies, Black studies, it somehow doesn't have a history of acknowledging class solidarity, but adding on top to it a racial or colonized aspect that is often disregarded by white leftists that are essentially class reductionists. So here we go. For example, it is a fact that there are white people in this country who are exploited. They are not colonized. They may be stripped of their economic wealth, but they have the same values, the same culture, the same history, and the same language as their rich white oppressors. But now let us examine Black people in this country. While we are also stripped of economic wealth and are poor, we are also stripped of our cultural, our language, our history, and our very way of life. That certainly defines the difference between poor whites and Black people in this country. And I just want to add, whenever white people lose their culture, lose their values, it's because they abandoned them, because they chose to align with whiteness even more. That's why you see all these cringy Conor McGregor fans that are suddenly, waving around the Irish flag. Before it was just they were Celtic fans in Boston. They'd have no knowledge or care for, say, a group like the RA. They don't care about the liberation of Ireland. It becomes an aesthetic to them, something they chose to abandon, something they chose to discard to distance themselves from the quote unquote others. So here we go. They may be stripped of their economic wealth, but they have the same values, the same culture, the same history, and the same language as their rich white oppressor. Oh, sorry, I was way off. That certainly defines the difference between poor whites and Black people in this country, and it differentiates around the world the difference between the colonization and the exploitation. We venture to say that colonization comes into play when there are people of a different race oppressing another race. Let me give a clear example. In Algeria today, French is taught. In the schools in Vietnam 20 years ago, French was taught. French was made the national language. In Algeria today, while Arabic is the national language, as the Algerians begin to cope with the process of decolonization, they are still forced to use French in the upper grades. What it means is that the Algerians were stripped of their language. They were forced to speak the language of their oppressor. Once one is forced to speak the language of his oppressor, he begins to think that his oppressor is in fact superior, and by definition, his own way of life, his culture, his value system is inferior. That's the sadistic part. That's the sickening part. When you start to internalize that, when you start to disparage, disregard, you start to hate your own culture because it distinguishes you from the oppressor. It's you realize that it's separating you, and that's why neoliberalism, right, is just liberalism, right? This whole like this embracing of saying like, no, no, we'll get a couple of you, a couple tokens, a couple sellouts to the top, so you can mislead your people, so you give a false sense of hope that you know I may be brown, broke, struggling, but there's other brown men in positions of power, and maybe if I work hard enough, I can get there too. The only way you're getting there is if you sell your people out hard enough. Again, this is why I get so aggravated with Norm Finkelstein and his whole like obsession with wokeness, because we've known that they're sellouts. We understand the internal conflict of being colonized, of being subjugated under white supremacy, to distance ourselves, to disregard and to hate our own culture, hell, our own fucking skin. Is it not a fact that the Algerians who were to make it to the top had to, in fact, become Frenchmen? Right? The same is true of the Vietnamese, and the same is true of the Black Americans. If they want to be accepted by the oppressor, they must, in fact, become carbon copies of their oppressor. I want to give that background because it is important for us to understand the movements in the world today. Let me give another example. It is a fact that the United States of America, which is the world's greatest imperialist power, does exploit Europe, but she exploits Europe economically. She colonizes the third world, that is the world of color, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And that's a key distinction, right? Like Europe might be at this point, um, as Germany rises, but just in general, might be the US's little brother at this point. The roles got reversed. There we go. And it's crazy because man, who was I listening to? I was listening to something. I hate not giving credit because if I'm listening to it and I'm learning from it, I want everybody else to listen to it and learn from it. It was VJ Prashad. I can't remember the channel that he did this interview, but he makes a comment how France has a permanent seat in the Security Council, right, for the UN. And it's like France, this pathetic has been empire that has no real power and relevance in the world stage when compared to Brazil, when compared to India. France? Yes, at one point you were managing to colonize and oppress, slaughter and kill the Algerians and the Vietnamese, but France today, when they can't even maintain their schools, their classrooms, the asbestos that they have there, everything's falling apart, but they still have a permanent seat, meaning they have more of a say in the world than Brazil or India, regardless of the population difference, regardless of the landmass difference, regardless of the economic power. France is still held, given more power, held to a higher position than countries like Brazil or India. That aside, I'm just saying the distinctions, the way that the quote unquote Western world or just these white countries view each other is delusional compared to the reality, the powerhouse that is China. All right, just imagine a yeah, maybe not a completely united Pan African utopia of Africa, but what we're seeing now, we're literally once again the French are getting kicked the fuck out. What we're seeing in Niger, what just it's beautiful. Hopefully, those coups, that's what they are, just by definition, they're coups, you know, swear their allegiance to the people. We've seen this successfully work with Hugo Chavez. So hopefully they truly follow in the steps of Thomas Sankara, but we'll see. Revolutionary optimism, man, after last night. So we'll go on. While 65% of the French economy is underwritten by American businessmen, the French people can still speak their own language. They still have their own type of culture. Let us take, for example, the island of Puerto Rico. The island of Puerto Rico, where over 85% of the people speak English in their own schools in Puerto Rico for 3 years and Spanish for two, is again a question of race and superiority, complex, a Western society built around an ingrained idea that because one is white, one is superior. So we say black people in America and perhaps colonized people around the world are not only fighting an economic system, but also a racist system. And this is something that we have to acknowledge when it comes to the colonization of Palestine. When you have these predominantly European, these predominantly American colonizers who are Jewish by faith or identifies as Jewish, you have to realize that that racism is still there of viewing Palestinians as the savages, as viewing the indigenous population, as barbaric. Because the way that we mass murder people, the technology that we're able to afford, distance us from the reality that we're still colonizers, that these Europeans are still colonizing. That's what Israel is. It's a European foothold and a way for Europe, the most anti-Semitic region of the world, to essentially kick out Jewish people. It's two perks for them. Black people in this country are fighting two evils. One of the evils is racism. The second is the evil of capitalism or imperialism, which is the highest stage of capitalism. Since our fight is against those twin evils, see, twin evils, we're not separating the economic and the racial, all right? We're not class reductionists here, and we're not liberals solely focusing on race. We never have been. When you actually do the work and you read the people, not like Norm Finkelstein who just wants to complain and dog whistle to the right as he launches a new podcast. Man, I'm on this motherfucker. I cannot stand him. I'm working on a side project to really break down and illustrate why he's full of shit, why he's an opportunist, why he sold out. So that's why it's on my mind. I know I did it on the last stream, kind of went after him, Norm Finkelstein. It wasn't enough. It wasn't concise and it wasn't clean enough. The cuts weren't deep enough. All right. Since our fight is against those twin evils, we must prepare an ideology that will meet both of them. A society that is free of racism and a society that is indeed is anti-capitalist and where capitalism cannot function. See, on a side note, if you establish this make-believe Marxist uh American Marxist communism, right? On stolen land, and this goes for the Israelis as well. They're kibbutz, they're so-called socialists, you know, agrarian movement. That's why it's bullshit. That's why you need more than that. That's why you need a both economic and racial attack on these things, these twin evils. I'm gonna start using that one. Like every good brown man steal from a black man. That's literally like our fucking entire culture as Mexican Americans. All right. And still racist as fuck. Anti-black as fuck. Let's be honest. That is the goal of the black movement in this country. If those goals are not made clear, the movement will be subverted. We will find ourselves being black capitalists, trying to enjoy a piece of the American pie, trying to identify with our oppressor and helping to oppress the rest of the world. Now, there are a number of groups functioning in the black liberation movement in this country. I will not give the philosophy of those groups. I will not speak for them because I wouldn't want their representatives to speak for us. There are, of course, a National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and the Congress for Racial Equality, the Student Nonviolent Coordinated Committee, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and the Black Panther Party. Most of these groups have basically been fighting for a share of the American pie, at least until recently. This is to say, they were kept out of the American dream, and many of them thought that if they were to adopt the manners, the mode, the culture of the oppressor, they would be accepted, and they too could enjoy the fruits of the American imperialism. But today, among the young generation of blacks in the country, an ideology is developing that says we cannot, in fact, accept the system. This differentiates the black militant from the black revolutionary. The black militant is one who yells and screams about the evils of the American system, himself trying to become a part of that system. Once again, the black militant is one who yells and screams about the evils of the American system, himself trying to become a part of that system. A black revolutionary cry is not that he is excluded, but that he wants to destroy, overturn, and completely demolish the American system and start with a new one that allows humanity to flow. I stand then on the side of the black revolutionary and not on the side of the black militant. All right. That's just the foundation to this chapter. But let's get into specifically the Palestinian aspect of it. All right. A few years ago, I was for the Jewish people of Israel. I wanted to know why the Arabs were bothering the Jews. I couldn't figure it out. It's not funny. Most Americans believe that the Arabs are committing crimes against the Jews because we live inside a society that postulates assertions, and these assertions are accepted as truth and never questioned. Because of that, we find ourselves in a world of fog that makes it very difficult to move clearly, to find the correct ideology and the correct positions as we move. That becomes very important for a number of reasons. I want to touch on the problems of Zionism as we, black people of this country, see it, and what our relation must be to the Arab world and to the forces that are fighting against the Arab people. Zionists have a very effective offensive propaganda. They state their propaganda and everyone accepts it as truth, and they put on the defensive anyone who tries to even question the propaganda by calling him anti Semitic. It's a very, very good trick. Nobody wants to be anti Semitic. Nobody wants to hate people merely because of their race. The way we found to counteract the offensive propaganda of the Zionists is to state our propaganda and state it offensively, and state ours as the truth and not bow down or question or quibble with the Zionist propaganda. That is the only way we have found to be able to deal with them. If the Zionist asserts that they have a right to Israel, then we assert that Palestinians have a right to Palestine. And once we assert that, there can be no room for discussion. If we accept their assertion and we begin to quibble with the Zionists, there's never room for discussion. But once we assert that the Palestinians have a right to Palestine because it belongs to them, then there can be room for discussion in this country. That is precisely what we did. Try very hard to calculate assertions that would for once put Zionists on the defensive in this country and let them back up their so called state of Israel, which we all know to be an unjust, certainly immoral state. What makes the forces of Zionism so effective in their propaganda is that the Zionists have something else. Not only do they assert theirs as a fact, and anyone who questions it, they put on defensive by calling them anti Semitic, but the Zionists hook up the killing of 6 million Jews as a justification for the so called state of Israel. Now, this is where you had to give Norman Finkelstein his props. And this is why, as petty as I am, I'm never going to put my nose up or turn down any valuable knowledge that will help liberate people, that will help us understand colonization, right? And how to dismantle it, or at least its origins and how it works. Because at the end of the day, Norman Finkelstein doesn't provide a method of combating colonization. He provides his conclusion is to compromise with it because he's a proponent of the two-state solution, meaning that Palestinians would still have to give up their land and live alongside, literally like bordering alongside Israel. And it's a nonsense conclusion because Israel will never just be content with anything less the entirety of Palestine. So check out Norm Finkelstein's The Holocaust Industry, where he dives into great detail about this. Bootleg it though. Don't give that man any money. They say, quote, 6 million Jews were murdered by Hitler. We have a right to Israel, unquote. And that is a very dangerous thing. It is a fact that 6 million Jews were slaughtered by Hitler, but that 6 million Jews were murdered by Hitler does not give the Zionists the right to take Arab land. If the Zionists I want to make sure I use the correct term because I don't want to be called anti Semitic. If in fact the Zionists are worried that they have lost 6 million Jews in Germany, if they are worried about the treatment that Hitler meted out to them, then it seems clear to me they should take the land of their home state from Germany, since it was Germany who fought them. And this is why I've always said, don't call me anti Semitic because I want to see a state of Israel. I just want to see it in Germany. That's all I'm saying. That's all I want. But Europeans are too anti-Semitic. That is where anti-Semitism was truly born. I think why the so-called state of Israel gets support from the Western powers is precisely because the role of Israel is now playing was planned to be the imperialist. I don't have to tell you the history that when Balfour gave the land, it was totally impossible for them to get European Jews to move to Israel. It was not until the slaughter of the Jews in Germany by Hitler that the state of Israel became a reality. Until then, they could not get the state to move. No one would leave and no one would go. Who wanted to get who wanted to get to the desert except Palestine? Sorry. There's a lot of noise going on in the background. Who wanted to get who wanted to go to the desert except Palestinians? Also, that's a funny line that I think that's why I was getting tripped up. All the noise. I don't know if it's coming up. I don't know if it's being picked up. I have to turn down my audio. But that line is like Kwame Ture is low key like really fucking funny. He literally says, "Who wanted to go to the desert except Palestinians?" All right, he continues. This is a very important point in terms of our coming to grips and dealing with the propaganda of the Zionists. Because once you feel sorry and sympathetic with a person, then you give him leeway. This is what we do with white people all the time, right? We always sympathize with white people. We always infantilize white people, especially white men, white women too, right? They're always perpetual virgins, and that's why black man and brown man are always viewed as deviants whenever they're around them. All right. And of course, with the Zionist propaganda telling people that there was nobody in Palestine, quote, it was a land without a people for a people without a land, and unquote, and making those assertions and propaganda into facts in the minds of our people, it becomes almost impossible to deal with it. Now, we in this country, as a gesture of solidarity with our brothers in the Arab world, intend to deal with the Zionists for several reasons. One reason is the same Zionists that exploit the Arabs also exploits us in this country. That is a fact, and that is not anti-Semitic. Yo, Stokely Carmichael, one brave motherfucker, man. Our propaganda must be offensive. We cannot just take a position of self-defense. That certainly can be related to physical combat. Che Guevara clearly says that self-defense is nothing but maintain the status quo. If one wants to change things, one must move against the status quo aggressively. That is a fact. That's why liberals don't actually change anything because they're afraid of combat. They're afraid of being aggressive. They're not assertive. They're not offensive, right? They get offended with the idea of fighting for what is right, fighting for rights, fighting to advance and progress humanity. They've never accomplished anything. Liberals have never accomplished for this very same reason because they're neutral. They're defensive at best. Well, conservatives are literally that regressive. If one wants to change things, one must move against the status quo aggressively. That is a fact. And what the scientists do is they have you believe that if you are more aggressively against them, you're committing a criminal act. That is very clear. We have watched their movement. What the scientists do is they set up a state called Israel, and then they give the justification for that state. People never question the foundations anymore, or the beginnings, or the fact that the state came into being. As they expand after each war, the territory that they conquer becomes incorporated in the quote unquote state of Israel. No one questions that the state anymore. No one questions that state anymore. And they continue to expand, always expanding, incorporating, expanding, and incorporating. And anyone who tries to fight them becomes an aggressor. An aggressor, right? In quotes. And that's the insidious nature of it. Is Once you concede this ground, literally, physically, once you concede ground to them, that's it, that's theirs. And to want it back or to fight for it back immediately becomes anti Semitic. And now you're Hitler 2.0. This is why I was so infuriated and disgusted by the fact that the Vanguard, Zach and Gavin, these white boys that are just, oh, hey, all we do is just pick up the shit at the end of the fucking circus line. That's what we do. That is what they do. Like, they have no knowledge of history, they have no foundational theory, they have nothing. They're not willing to work to learn. In fact, they promote uh, this anti intellectualism. There was a time when the working class was always engaged intellectually and pushing forward, um, working crazy hours and still gathering to read theory and organize. And these people, these individuals, are against that. But when you have a presidential candidate on 4 times, and on the fourth time, she starts spreading Zionist lies about the origins of Israel not being racist, and Zionist lies about the Labor Party and the US labor should be united, as if the Labor Party of Israel wasn't somehow more racist than the conservatives. All right, now we stand clear. Self defense will only maintain the status quo. If Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, before Egypt sold out, took a position of self defense today, they would come out losing because the Israelis still occupy their land. If they want the land back, they must move aggressively against the occupying forces. And as they move aggressively, we have to move aggressively. There is no need to talk about peaceful coexistence. Anyone who calls for peaceful coexistence is calling for the status quo to remain the same. And that's the issue and the problem with Norm Finkelstein. Your radicalism ends at the oppression of Palestinians. You just wanted to cash in and advocate, for your family's suffering. You felt you were indignant, right? You felt disrespected for what your family had gone through during the Holocaust, the fact that it was being used to subjugate other people. But in reality, you did not give a fuck about Palestinians and their suffering. Just the fact that Israel was tarnishing your parents and your family's legacy. Which honestly, like, if that's all it is, it's fine. You gave us great work to build off of, but then don't go crying and saying that you got canceled when we discard you because you're actually not about it. You're okay with the status quo, a two-state solution. The only solution is armed revolution. And what did we just see? What did we just see? What did we see? Palestinians rising up, armed. And I would argue that the revolutionary part is I understand what he's getting at, but what it really is uh liberation, right? The- But okay, maybe that's just semantics. Maybe I'm wrong. It's fine. Let's move on. Those who say that we can exist with the imperialist forces are saying that we can exist with the things the way they are. We never have to change them. But if we are suffering, we need change, and we must decide how that change is to come about. How then do we stand? Do we not intend to discuss the internal policies of the Arab world? That's a decision for the Arabs. We can only support the Arab world as we see fit. It is clear that we may have certain likes and we feel closer to certain groups or certain governments more than we do to others. For example, we feel very close to the commandos in Palestine. We feel that they are a group that will get most of our support. We feel very strongly committed to those Arab countries that are arming their people because if you are for the people, we have nothing to fear from the people. We feel very strongly committed to those countries that are building revolutionary governments, and we are not afraid to say so. We know that the June 5th aggression has several purposes. One was to destroy the revolutionary government of the Arab world. We know that. And so we will support those revolutionary governments in what little meager way we can. Because the spreading of these revolutionary governments in the Arab world is indeed a threat to the world imperialism. Now, then, what is our role as we see it? How can we work with the Arab brothers? Number one, we can begin to spread propaganda against Zionism right here. That's what we're doing. That's what we've been doing. All right. And begin to enlighten and educate the masses of our people. Slowly but surely, aquí andamos. We have. begun to do that. Not only did we do it publicly last year, but at, for example, the National Convention of the New Politics in Chicago last year, we have taken the position that if white people who call themselves revolutionary or radical want our support, they had to condemn Zionism. Again, this is a reason why I was so like infuriated. I don't have notes on this one. I have it on the paperback. That's why I was so infuriated and disgusted with these guys that call themselves leftists who change labels from communism to anarchist to anarcho communist, social libertarian, whatever, the vanguard. The fact that when it was your time to shine, to show solidarity, to speak up against power, this rich Hollywood, guru, I'm assuming she's filthy fucking rich. She's running for president basically on her own dime because everybody else knows she's a joke. She's she sold millions of books. I'm sure she has Oprah's blessing. You didn't speak up when when she spread lies on your platform. Why not? That was your moment. That's what allyship is about. But the whites always fold. Let's start from the top there. We have taken the position that if white people who call themselves revolutionary or radical want our support, they have to condemn Zionism. We will continue to do that when we work with groups. We must. We will continue to spread that. We're trying now in many of the black colleges across the country to see it that Arab culture and the Arab language become, in fact, a part of the curriculum so that we can begin to know more about the Arab way of life and understand what the imperialists are doing. We intend to start storybooks and talk about life in the Arab world so that our people become aware and begin, as much as possible, to fight Zionist propaganda. The mass media of the United States of America, which wholeheartedly supports Israel, is unfortunately controlled by the Zionists. Now, I want to make this very clear at this point because somebody might say, "Oh, that's anti-Semitic." He's not talking about Jewish people. He's talking about Zionists. Joe Biden himself said that he's a Zionist and he's Catholic. So again, we have to make that distinction because Zionism wants to own the label of of Judaism, right? We can't allow that because there's a lot of fucking cool and dope and inspiring Jewish people who are anti-Zionists, who have been locked up because they refuse to serve in the IDF, or who just are here in the states and are actively in solidarity, actively organizing and showing up for Palestinians. We intend to make it clear that we will help the struggle of the Arabs in any way we can, not only financially and morally, but with our very lives. We see Africa as our motherland. That's not so far fetched. The Zionists built a propaganda that Palestine was the motherland, the homeland of the Jews, and building up this propaganda has made young Jewish people feel that they have to be committed to their homeland for life or death. I'm looking at you, Eric Hawani. I tell you, I'm going to be sneaking in my MMA, my love for mixed martial arts. Ariel Hawani, um, journalist, the biggest journalist in MMA, literally is tweeting out eh, in support and crying over Israel. And then when he gets pushback, it's like, hey man, like from other people, my pushback was very different, but other people were saying, hey, don't involve politics into my sports, right? He's like, oh, my parents went through this. My grandparents got kidnapped by the PLO, and I'm like, I wonder what they were doing. I need to look into that. I have to look into that. But here we are, this Canadian obsessed and this fever pitch to support Israel. So we can see that fervor, that love that Zionists have, the delusional love that Zionists have. We could see a genuine revolutionary love and support of everyone's individual motherland, or at least in solidarity with those fighting for their motherland. And building up this propaganda has made young Jewish people feel that they have to be committed to their motherland for life or death. When the aggression took place in 1967, millions of dollars were raised across America at a snap of a finger. Young Jewish people were dropping out of school to go and fight for the homeland They established a state in 1948, and yet they feel such a strong tie with it. There is no difference in black people going to fight for and defend Egypt. Egypt is in Africa, and Africa is our homeland. The oldest civilization in the world comes from Egypt. We must feel we are a part of it. There are many of us who are slowly beginning to prepare for that propaganda and prepare for the actual fight. We intend to fight imperialism wherever it is, in the United States or in our homeland. So we say very clearly that because Egypt is in our motherland, we will fight the forces of imperialism whenever they are trying to invade our homeland and our motherland. I'll end that there. So here's what I'm going to be doing. I really wanted to continue this, and I will. But I'm exhausted, y'all. But I do want to give voice to actual Palestinians. For me, that was kind of like, I'm not Palestinian. I know a lot of people who are supporting. Yo, no lie. I apologize, y'all. Yeah, just started seeing people blowing stuff up and taking things out of context. I thought I was doing a fairly decent job at being explicit that distinguishing um Jewish people from Zionism, but it's all right. Some people need to just study more, learn more. Ask yourself why the evangelical right are all fervent, bloodthirsty Zionists. They're Christians, they're conservative, most of them are anti Semitic. So why would they support Israel? Because Zionism isn't about Jewish people. Zionism is about colonization with a pretense of the Holocaust and Judaism for cover. That's truly what it is. Now let's talk about the transfer, right? The explosion of Palestine. Damn, this is all right. Take a lot. This is a lot of text. Like it just I had to enlarge the previous one. The Stokely speaks. Call me Ture speech. So this is like larger than what I'm used to, but I think that allows y'all to see it better, so it's fine. Y soy ciego, so what the hell? Who cares? The Zionist concept of quote unquote transfer, a euphemism denoting the organized removal of the indigenous population of Palestine to neighboring countries, is a prickly and even explosive subject that married researchers and writers focusing on Palestine have avoided for obvious reasons. From the outset, however, this concept has occupied a central position in the strategic thinking of the leadership of the Zionist movements and the Yoshuv, the Jewish community in Palestine, as a solution to the quote unquote Arab question in Palestine. Just real quick, just to go back, did I emphasize enough, or did I get distracted by the chat, that like the reason I read Stokely Carmichael first is for all of us who aren't Palestinian but are anti-Zionist? Like that was the purpose of that, to demonstrate. That's why I read a little bit of the forefront of that chapter to kind of break down uh, colonization and how it's inherently connected to capitalism, the exploitation, the economic exploitation. But that's all to say, like when we see oppression happening, when we see colonization happening, and when we see economic exploitation happening, like we have to show solidarity, and we have to go out of our way, as Stokely said, like they're encouraging people to speak Arabic and learn the history. Like we have to go out of our way to try and understand, to challenge ourselves, to try and be better allies. And honestly, like intellectually, it's a benefit to learn new history, to learn learn a new language. So yeah, that's why I thought it was important to start off with that and kind of emphasize the fact that like, hey, you don't have to be Palestinian to support Palestinians. Shit, I was celebrating yesterday. Like I'm telling you, I was talking to To my homie, and I was telling him like, "Yo, like I'm hyped up. I don't know how you feel. Like I can't imagine." And he was just ecstatic. It was a historic night and day for them. All right. Indeed, the idea of transfer is as old as the early Zionist colonies in Palestine and the rise of political Zionism. It can be said to be the logical outgrowth of the ultimate goal of Zionist movement, which was the establishment of a Jewish state through colonization and land acquisition. In other words, through a radical ethno-religious demographic transformation of the country. The population, which had been almost entirely Arab at the start of the Zionist venture. So just to break that down, it's like basically saying like not only are they going to colonize and take over, but with the explicit veneer of religion as a uniting force. I mean, the Catholics did the same thing when they're in, those conquistadores did the same thing, and the Protestants did the same thing in the U.S. So were they honestly generally caring about Christianity and all its forms? No, they just wanted and needed an excuse to galvanize people to unite and to commit atrocities in their God's name, right? The same exact thing that Zionists are doing with the Jewish religion. Okay. While the desire among Zionists is to solve the Arab question, or badly stated, to be rid of the native Palestinian population, remain a constant until the quote unquote miraculous simplification of the problem during the 1948 war, the envisaged modalities of the transfer change over the years, according to circumstances. Thus, the wishful belief in Zionism's early years that the native population could be, quote, spirited across the borders, unquote, in the words of political Zionism founders Theodore Herz, or that they would simply, quote, fold their tents and slip away, unquote, to use a formulation of the Anglo Jewish writer Israel Zigwil, soon gave way to more realistic assessments. These assessments necess- necessitated strategies and planning that produce a series of specific plans, generally involving Transjordan, Syrian, or Iraq. As of the late 1930s, they included proposals for agrarian legislation and citizenship restrictions designed to encourage the Arabs to, quote unquote, transfer voluntarily. The only way that people transfer voluntarily away from their homes is when you make the living conditions unbearable. And you only do that through violence, direct or indirect. And just to be clear, this is from the text here is the expulsion of the Palestinians. The concept of quote unquote transfer in Zionist political thought, 1882 through 1948. I did want to give you I don't want to risk losing my page but I do want to give you the name uh, of the author, which we looked at before, and it's Nur al-Din Masalha, or just Nur Masalha. Okay. It should be It should not be imagined that the concept of transfer was held only by the maximalists or the extremists within the Zionist movement. On the contrary, it was embraced by almost all shades of opinion, from the revisionist right to the labor left. And see, that's what I'm saying. The labor left that Marianne Williamson was pushing on the Zionist guard is just as equally embracing of ethnic cleansing than the right in Israel, right? Virtually every member of the Zionist pantheon of founding fathers and important leaders supported it and advocated it in one form or another, from Chaim Weizmann and Vladimir Jablitsky to David Ben Gurion and the Menachem Osurskin. Butcher those, but I will not apologize. Supporters of transfer included such moderates as the quote unquote Arab appeaser, Moshe Shertok, and the socialist author Rupin, founder of the Brit Shalom, a movement advocating equal rights for Arabs and Jews. More importantly, transfer proposals were put forward by the Jewish agency itself, in effect, the government of Yusuf. Even socialists, even socialists can be white nationalists. And that's one thing that infuriates me, that people just think, oh, well, if you just read Marx, you're fine. Well, no, no, not if you're on colonized land, right? Not if you're part of the oppressor group. You can still be a white nationalist and you're spewing Marx. We're seeing that, right, with MAGA communism. We're seeing that with Midwestern Marx. They're white nationalists. In light of the massive exodus of Arabs from Palestine in 1948, the issue of transfer assumes crucial importance. This study sets out to explore the historical links between Zionist adherence to the strategic goal of establishing a Jewish homeland state in Palestine and advocacy of the political strategic concept of transfer. It will analyze the notion against the background of Zionist ideological principles and doctrines such as Havara Ivrit, Hebrew labor, Adma Ivrit, Hebrew land, and Kabush Ha-Aduma, land conquest. Kabush. Yeah. It would appear that the intensification of efforts to implement those doctrines in the 1930s contributed to the consolidation of the transfer proposal into official Yusuf positions. The study will trace the evolution of the concepts of transfer describe a number of unpublished plans put forward in the 30s and the 40s within the context of unfolding events. Finally, the book will discuss the realization of Zionist goals during the 1948 war with special reference to the leadership discussions of transfer rather than to the military this mission per se, dimension per se. So let's move on forward because here's going to give you the chapter breakdowns. Um, and let's just read a little bit more. When in the late 19th century, Zionism arose as a political force calling for the colonization of Palestine and the quote unquote gathering of all Jews, little attention was paid to the fact that Palestine was already populated. Indeed, the Basel Program, adopted at the First Zionist Congress, which launched political Zionism in 1897, made no mention of a Palestinian native population when it spelled out the movement's objective. Quote, the establishment of a publicly and legally secured home in Palestine for the Jewish people, unquote. But then they'll claim that there is no Palestine, that Palestine was never a thing. But it's there in their papers, it's there in their own documents. See, because back then, and this was at the tail end of it, but in that era, this is Zionist transfer ideas and proposals, 1882 through 1936. Like being a colonizer was like admired. Like, oh, you conquered this land and you conquered these people or expelled them. So they weren't ashamed of it. It showed their prowess, their organizational abilities. Moreover, in the early years of their efforts to secure support for their enterprise, the Zionists propagated in the West the idea of a land without a people for people without a land, a slogan coined by Israel Zegwill, a prominent Anglo Jewish writer, often quoted in British press as a spokesperson for Zionism and one of the earliest organizers of the Zionist movement in Britain. Even as of late, as 1914, Chaim Weizmann, who was to become the first president of Israel and who, along with Theodore Herzl and David Ben-Gurion, was one of the three men most responsible for turning the Zionist dream into reality, stated, in its initial stage, Zionism was conceived by its pioneers as a movement wholly dependent on the mechanical factors. There is a country which happens to be called Palestine, a country without a people. And on the other hand, there exists a Jewish people, and it has no country. What else is necessary then than to fit the gem into the ring, to unite this people with this country? The owners of the country, the Turks, must therefore be persuaded and convinced that this marriage is advantageous not only for the Jewish people and for the country, but also for themselves. Neither Zangwill nor Weissman intended these demographic assessments in a literal fashion. They did not mean that there were no people in Palestine, but that there were no people worth considering within the framework of the notions of European supremacy that had then held sway. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not that there weren't people, right? It's that they weren't human to them. They weren't actually relevant. They were almost like a different species in their eyes. And this is the era of the peak of racism, right? When we're having like individuals like study skulls and shapes and sizes to excuse enslavement. Or my actually, I'm tired because I think my dates might be a little bit off there. Okay, eugenics was afoot. That's what I was trying to get at. In this connection, a comment by Weissman to author Rubin, the head of the colonization department of the Jewish Agency, is particularly revealing. When asked by Rubin about the Palestinian Arabs, Weissman replied, quote, "The British told us that there are the British told us that there are there some 100,000 Negroes, Cusham, and for those there is no value." Zagwell himself spelled out the actual meaning of his slogan with admirable clarity in 1920. States, if Lord Shaftesbury was literally and exact in describing Palestine as a country without a people, he was essentially correct, for there is no Arab people living in intimate fashion, in intimate fusion with a country, utilizing its resources and stamping it with a characteristic impress. There is at best an Arab encampment. And there's the irony, right? Or always the hypocrisy of colonizers. Now, homie, you showed up in the encampment. You were struggling to colonize the land, to know the land, to work the land. The indigenous people were just doing what they've always done. Despite such statements, however, the Zionists from the outset were well aware that not only were there people on the land, but there were but that people were there in large numbers. Zagwell, who had visited Palestine in 1897 and came face to face with the demographic reality, acknowledged in 1905 in a speech to a Zionist group in Manchester that, quote, Palestine proper has already its inhabitants. The Pashalik of Jerusalem is already twice as thickly populated as the United States, having 52 souls to the square mile, and not 25% of them Jewish. So the numbers were off from the offset. Abundant references to the Palestinian population in the early Zionist texts show clearly that from the beginning of Zionist settlement in Palestine, which Zionist historiography dates to the arrival of the members of the Russian Pelu Society in 1882, the Palestinian Arabs were far from being quote unquote unseen or quote unquote hidden presence. Moreover, recent studies have shown that Zionist leaders were concerned with what they term quote unquote the Arab problem or quote unquote the Arab question. As seen in their writings, the attitudes prevailing among the majority of the Zionist groups and settlers concerning the indigenous Palestinian population range from indifference and disregard to patronizing superiority. A typical example can be found in the words of Moshe Smolensky, a Zionist writer and labor leader who immigrated to Palestine in 1890. Again, a labor leader here. Keep that in mind for Marianne Williamson. Let us not be too familiar with the Arab falahin, lest our children adopt their ways and learn from their ugly deeds. Let all those who are loyal to the Torah avoid ugliness and that which resembles it, and keep their distance from the falahin and their base attributes. A Labor Party leader for you, ladies and gentlemen. Amazing. Wow, so enlightened. That's who Marianne Williamson wants to connect the American labor like, she wants American labor to regress to its root, like, essentially, uh, KKK, white supremacist, workers' party. There were certainly those who took exception to such attitude. Ahid Aham, a liberal Russian Jewish thinker who visited Palestine in 1891, published a series of articles in the Hebrew periodical Hamletz that were sharply critical of the ethnocentricity of political Zionism as well as the exploitation of Palestinian peasantry by Zionist colonists. Ahid Aham, who sought to draw attention to the fact that Palestine was not an empty territory and that the presence of another people in the land posed problems, observed the Zionist quote unquote pioneers believed that the quote only language that the Arabs understood is that of force. They behaved towards the Arabs with hostility and cruelty, trespassed unjustly upon their boundaries, beat them shamefully without reason, and even brag about it. And nobody stands to check this contemptible and dangerous tendency. Unquote. He cut to the heart of the matter when he ventured that the colonists' aggressive attitude towards the native peasants stemmed from their anger, quote, towards those who reminded them that there is still another people on the land of Israel that have been living there and does not intend to leave, unquote. It's always been that way with colonization. There's always this the proximity and the acknowledgement that, hey, we're invading. You're reminded me the fact that I'm a colonizer makes me uncomfortable because the reality of being a colonizer is very distinct from my imagined sense of colonizing and conquering this land. That's why that's why white people hate being reminded they're white. Because of what it entails. Because it entails white supremacy and it entails colonization. It just does. And that's why you need to abandon and relinquish your whiteness. We'll end it here. Another early settler, Yitzhak Epstein, who arrived in Palestine from Russia in 1886, warned not only of the moral implications of Zionist colonization, but also the political dangers inherent in the enterprise. In 1907, at a time when Zionist land purchases in the Galilee were stirring opposition among Palestinian peasants, forced out the land sold by absentee landlords, and that's why landlords are fucking garbage. Epstein wrote a controversial article entitled, quote, The Hidden Question, unquote, in which he strongly criticized the methods by which Zionists had purchased Arab land. In his view, these methods entailed dispossession of Arab farmers were bound to cause political confrontation in the future. Reflected in the Zionist establishment, angry response to Epstein's article are two principal features of mainstream Zionism thought: the belief that Jewish acquisition of land took precedence over moral consideration, and the advocacy of a separatist and exclusionist Yusuf. We're going to return to that text. I think we're just going to start reading this shit like on every stream. Even if there's drama, even if there's other topics, I think just continuing it and embracing this constant pursuit of knowledge of the colonization of Palestine. You know, check out my live videos, subscribe, but check out my previous videos, all in the live category. I was talking shit about these liberal Zionists from the offset, and we cannot allow ourselves to get comfortable or to forego learning the history just because Palestinians are currently rising up. We can't say, "Oh, they got it." They obviously they got it, but in terms of like, oh, okay, it's I no longer need to study essentially, right? Because it's already happening. I'm witnessing history. I don't need to learn previous history. You absolutely do. You absolutely do. Because one of the things that I can admit that I'll freely admit that I'm lacking in is everybody saying like, "Oh, this um, attack against the colonial settler project of Israel by Palestinians, people are saying, like Palestinians are saying, this is like more than any Antifada. But I haven't studied the Antifada, so I'm like, is that legit? Is that just, you're hyped up? It seems like it because the numbers, if numbers like this had occurred previously, I'm sure Zionists would have been like throwing it in everybody's faces. So see, this is why we need to oppress them. But I need to learn that. I have not dove into the Antifadas, the Yom Kippur Wars. I've seen documentaries, but that's insufficient. You got to read, you got to take notes, and uh, you got to say that shit out loud sometimes, so you can hear yourself, so you could process it better. Yeah, I'm exhausted. I'm hungry. I'm gonna get hangry. I don't want to bring that energy on here. Please like and subscribe. We're witnessing history unfold before our eyes. We're very fortunate for that. Educate yourself. Be in solidarity with Palestinians and all colonized people. And honestly, like, just fucking pursue that knowledge. Like, go after it. I was gonna say something else, but tengo tanta pinche hambre that I can't focus. And I'm tired. It's real shit. So yeah, please like and subscribe. I just remember what I was gonna say. Okay, here's the thing: we're witnessing and we're seeing all these white lefties, self-described leftists that are just centrist liberals at best, cry over the death and the taking of Zionists. That's what I'm saying. AOC, Ilhan Omar, Bernie Sanders, Dr. West. But it's not just them. It's the streamers, the other white streamers. It's just heartbreaking. It's not heartbreaking, honestly. I think a lot of people um, don't really realize that a lot of these guys are white nationalists. But it's heartbreaking that so many people follow them without that critical lens. Look what look what Dr. West said. The escalation of the barbaric violence in the Middle East must stop. The vicious Israeli occupation and the ugly Palestinian retaliation result in the killing of precious innocent people on both sides. We must have a lasting peace based on justice. Truth is justice. Love. Israel, Palestine. What a fucking sellout. Literally doing like the both sides. The only way this stops is if Israel goes and colonizes Germany instead. That's the only way this stops. Everything else is bullshit. It's just, I mean, what Kwame Ture said. If you're not offensive, then you're just maintaining the status quo. I did promise, or I don't promise anything on here, but I did say I was going to go over the Breakthrough News YouTube uh, video, this interview with Ryan Kalik, and I don't want to disregard that. So we'll just play one question and answer, and then we'll come back to it. And I'll do my best to translate here. So this is titled "Exclusive Interview with Popular Front of the excuse me, exclusive interview with Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine leader." Breakthrough News. Please go like and subscribe their channel. Amazing work. I don't understand how, like, there's Black Power Media on Breakthrough News and people are still watching TYT or the Majority Report. I'm like, why? Okay. We're good to go here.
من كل منظم لأن التنظيم يضاعف القوة
So
وبذلك
question,
يعني كنا
and
فلسطينيين بدون أي اختزال.
here
So the U.S.
I'll translate what he says in case the font is too small.
labels the PFLP a terrorist organization. What is your response to this label?
So again, the question was, the U.S. labels his organization, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, as a terrorist organization. His answer starts off, he says, there is no doubt the United States of America has strong strategic relationships
يعني لا شك أن الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية لديها علاقة استراتيجية قوية مع الدولة الصهيونية.
with the Zionist state.
بالتالي من الطبيعي
Therefore, it is natural for it to adopt Zionist ideas, especially as there are mutual services and services of strategic nature.
خاصة أن هناك خدمات متبادلة وخدمات ذات طابع استراتيجي تقوم بها. وأنا هنا أتذكر
Here, I remember what the current American president said that you do not necessarily have to be Jewish in order to be Zionist. That's what I was saying earlier. Biden was like, I'm Catholic and I'm a Zionist. Because it's just, you're just promoting the colonization of Palestine. That's all it is. With the veneer of being Jewish in order to hustle the Holocaust.
هنا صهيونيا. فهذا يعني بشكل
This
واضح
clearly means a complete exposure to the nature of the American discourse that it is trying to promote in the world.
لأن
Because the issue of resistance, for example, is the choice of the Palestinian,
التي تحاول أن تسوقه في العالم لأن
because the issue of resistance, for example, is the choice of the Palestinian people.
مسألة المقاومة مثلا هذا خيار الشعب.
Because we're facing an enemy that occupies our land.
بحكم أننا نحن أمام عدو يحتل أرضنا وبالتالي كل
Therefore, all laws allow us to do this form of resistance to resist the Zionist colonization.
هذا الشكل من أشكال المقاومة لمقاومة هذا الاستعمار الصهيوني. لكن
But when the PFLP carried out these actions, it is responding to the Palestinian people to
قامت بهذا العمل فهي تستجيب للشعب الفلسطيني للدفاع عن
defend this people.
نحن أمام
We are facing an enemy, or an enemy that glorifies the philosophy of power,
هو عدو يمجد فلسفة القوة عدو يمارس العدوان
an enemy that practices aggression on a daily and continuous basis against Palestinian people.
مستمر ضد الشعب الفلسطيني.
The world was unable to stop this aggression against the Palestinian people,
يوقف هذا العدوان على الشعب الفلسطيني.
so it was the Palestinian people who chose their options in practicing this resistance.
خياراته في ممارسة هذا المقاومة. هذه المسألة لن
This issue will never lessen or resolve by any degree because the
يعني تفل
PFLP believes in
بالدرجة لأن الجبهة الشعبية تحت فلسطين تؤمن
liberation values. Therefore, it is not a matter of whether a large or small country
كبيرة أو صغيرة
accuses it of this matter. We know that all revolutions in history have been demonized and distorted, and they have
وجرى يعني وصفها بنعود
been described with different epithets. But when they win, they achieve a great meaning for this people,
يعني معنى كبير لهذا.
or for the people.
What is the
I do want to continue on this interview, pero tengo hambre, mucha hambre. So I appreciate y'all. Please like and subscribe. I will bring more drama to it, but I want to be honest. Like, I love to nerd out a little bit here. I love to just start reading. It keeps me consistent, keeps me on point with my studies. So I want to drag y'all with me some days. I appreciate y'all. Thank you. Free Palestine from the river to the sea. We're going to see it in our lifetimes. It's going to be beautiful. Appreciate y'all. Keep that revolutionary optimism burning.